Hi, I'm Jessica Taylor. They promised me a future, then sold it behind my back. The money meant for my education disappeared overnight into my brother's hands. But they never expected the quiet daughter they dismissed to be the one holding the deed to their home when the bank came calling. Ever been told your dreams matter less than someone else's? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain tapped against my windshield as I pulled into the parking lot of First Northwest Bank. I'd been putting this meeting off for weeks, but my final tuition payment was due in 10 days, and I couldn't delay any longer. The manila folder on my passenger seat contained all the documentation I needed to access my college fund, the account my parents had proudly shown me when I was 12, the one they'd been contributing to since my birth, the safety net that was supposed to carry me through my final year at Reed College. I grabbed my umbrella and dashed through puddles to the glass doors, rehearsing the conversation in my head. My degree was nearly complete, environmental science with a focus on sustainable urban planning. Just 2 semesters left. The internship at the city planning office was lined up for spring. Everything was going according to plan, or so I thought. Good morning. I'd like to access my educational trust account, I told the advisor who greeted me. His name tag read Marcus, and he had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Of course. Account number and ID, please? I slid my driver's license across the desk along with the trust document. The account was established by Robert and Diana Taylor. I'm Jessica Taylor, the beneficiary. Marcus typed something into his computer, his expression shifting subtly. He clicked a few more keys, then frowned. I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor, but I'm not seeing an active account under that number. That can't be right. It's been open for over 20 years. A few more keystrokes. The account was closed approximately 3 months ago. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Closed? By whom? The trustees. Your parents. He looked genuinely apologetic. All funds were withdrawn on February 12th. February 12th. I remembered that date clearly. It was my brother Nathan's birthday. While I'd been working double shifts, at the campus coffee shop, my parents had been emptying my future. There must be some mistake, I insisted, pulling out more paperwork. I have the original trust agreement here. The funds were designated specifically for my education. Marcus reviewed the documents, then looked up with that expression people get when they're about to deliver bad news. This type of educational trust allows the trustees, your parents, to modify or terminate the account at their discretion until the beneficiary reaches 25. You're 23, I finished for him. I'm sorry, but legally, they were within their rights to close the account. I felt the blood drain from my face. $48,000? Gone. My entire senior year and graduate school plans vanished in a single transaction that no one had bothered to mention to me. Is there any record of where the funds were transferred? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Marcus hesitated, then typed again. The funds were moved to another educational trust account. He paused. The beneficiary is listed as Nathan Taylor. My brother. The golden child. The one who had already dropped out of 2 colleges and was now suddenly interested in attending an expensive private university in California. The one who had wrecked his 3rd car last Christmas and still received a new one by New Year's. I thanked Marcus mechanically, gathered my now useless papers, and walked out into the rain without opening my umbrella. The water soaked through my jacket, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing ahead to calculations and consequences. My scholarship covered only 60% of my tuition. My job at the coffee shop barely paid rent. Student loans would take years to process, and the deadline was approaching fast. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my mother. Jessie, are you coming to dinner tonight? I'm making your father's favorite pot roast. Nathan's driving up from Eugene to join us. He has exciting news. I let the call go to voicemail. That evening, I sat in my small apartment above Mrs. Winter's garage in the Overlook neighborhood, surrounded by spreadsheets and loan applications. My roommate Megan found me there, eyes red, calculator in hand. "Jess, what happened?" She sat beside me, pushing aside a stack of papers to make room. The whole story poured out. The empty account, my brother's new windfall, the approaching deadlines. Megan listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. "You need to confront them," she said finally. "Maybe there's an explanation." What possible explanation could there be for stealing my college fund and giving it to Nathan? He's already wasted more opportunities than most people get in a lifetime. "I don't know," Megan admitted. "But you won't either unless you ask them directly." She was right, of course. But confrontation had never been my strong suit, especially with my family. I'd always been the peacekeeper, the responsible one, the child who caused no trouble and therefore received little attention. Nathan, with his constant crises and grand ambitions, had always commanded the spotlight. Before I could talk myself out of it, I texted my mother. "I know about the college fund. I'll be there for dinner after all." Her response came seconds later. "Wonderful. 6:30 sharp, no acknowledgement, no explanation, just wonderful and a dinner time." The Taylor family home sat on a tree-lined street in the Hawthorne district, a 1920s craftsman with a wide front porch and meticulously maintained flower beds. I'd helped plant those hydrangeas the summer before college. The porch swing where I'd spent countless hours reading still hung from the same chains, swaying gently in the evening breeze. It all looked so normal, so unchanged, while my whole world had been upended. I parked my 10-year-old Honda behind my father's gleaming SUV and my brother's brand-new Audi, the replacement for the car he'd totaled 6 months ago. The contrast wasn't lost on me. My mother answered the door with a wooden spoon in hand, flour dusting her apron. "Jessie, perfect timing. Your father just opened a bottle of that Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley." I followed her into the kitchen, the familiar scent of pot roast and rosemary enveloping me. My father sat at the island, wineglass in hand, while Nathan leaned against the counter, animated as he described his plans for fall semester. "Berkeley has this amazing business program," he was saying. "The connections alone are worth the tuition. Silicon Valley recruiters practically camp out at graduation." My father nodded approvingly. "Best investment we could make. Your grandfather would be proud to see a Taylor at Berkeley." "Speaking of investments," I said, setting my bag on the counter with a thud. "I had an interesting visit at the bank today." The kitchen fell silent. My mother turned back to the stove, suddenly very concerned with stirring the gravy. My father took a long sip of his wine. Nathan looked confused. "What bank thing?" "My college fund," I said, looking directly at my father. "The one that's apparently been emptied and given to you." Nathan had the decency to look uncomfortable. My father cleared his throat. "Jessica, we were going to discuss this with you." "When? After I got kicked out of my senior year for non-payment? After my graduation date passed?" "Don't be dramatic," my mother said, still not turning around. "We made a family decision." "A family decision?" I repeated. "Funny, I don't remember being part of that family discussion." "You got 3 years of college," my father said, his tone hardening. "Nathan needed a fresh start. Berkeley is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "So was Reed," my voice cracked. "I have 1 year left. 1 year that I've worked toward while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, while working 20 hours a week, while applying for every scholarship available." "And we're very proud of you," my mother said, finally turning to face me. "But Nathan needs this chance. You've always been the responsible one. You'll figure something out." The casual cruelty of it left me breathless. "You'll figure something out." as if my education, my future, my dreams were simply inconvenient details, to be handled rather than the foundation of my life. Nathan at least had the grace to look ashamed. "Jess, I didn't know the money came from your account. They told me it was from their investment portfolio." I believed him. Nathan was self-centered, not malicious. The architects of this betrayal were sitting right across from me, calmly sipping wine as if they hadn't just derailed their daughter's life. "I need that money back," I said simply, "or at least enough to finish my degree." My father shook his head. "It's already been paid to Berkeley. First semester's tuition and housing, non-refundable. Then I'll take out loans, and you can co-sign them." It was a reasonable compromise, I thought. The least they could do. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "That won't be possible," my father said carefully. "Our credit situation is complicated at the moment." "What does that mean?" "It means," my mother interjected, "that we're having a temporary cash flow issue. Your father's business had some setbacks. It's nothing to worry about." But there was worry in her eyes, and something else. Fear. "The investment property in Seattle fell through," my father admitted. "We're carrying 2 mortgages until we can find another buyer. The market's slow right now." Pieces began falling into place. The family decision wasn't about Nathan's opportunity. It was about salvaging what they could before the financial house of cards collapsed, and I was the one whose future had been sacrificed. Dinner was a silent, tense affair. I picked at my pot roast while Nathan tried to fill the awkward silence with stories about his new apartment in Berkeley. My parents nodded and smiled, relieved to focus on something other than their financial deception. I left as soon as politeness allowed, declining dessert and ignoring my mother's half-hearted invitation to come back for Sunday brunch. In my car, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, too angry even to cry. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't respond. It wasn't his fault. Not really. But I couldn't absolve him either. Not yet." The next morning, I called the financial aid office at Reed. The advisor was sympathetic but firm. Without the expected family contribution, my scholarship would be reduced proportionally. Even with emergency loans, I'd be short by thousands. Deferment was an option, but my carefully planned internship wouldn't wait. The pieces of my future were scattering before my eyes. That afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Jessica Taylor, this is Elliot Donovan. I'm your grandfather's attorney." My grandfather had passed away 3 years ago. I hadn't heard from his lawyer since the initial reading of the will, where we'd learned that most of his estate had been left to my father, with small personal bequests to me and Nathan. "I'm calling because a provision in your grandfather's trust has recently been activated," Mr. Donovan continued. "He established what we call a contingent educational fund. It becomes available if the primary educational trusts he established for his grandchildren are compromised." My heart stuttered. Compromised? Redirected, depleted, or otherwise made unavailable to the intended beneficiary. His tone was carefully neutral. "Your grandfather was very specific about his wishes for his estate. Education was paramount to him." "I don't understand. How did you know about my college fund?" As the trust administrator, I received notifications of significant changes to the associated accounts. When your parents closed your educational trust, it triggered a review. My grandfather had anticipated this. He'd known his own son well, enough to create a safety net beneath the safety net. "There's a separate account in your name," Mr. Donovan explained, "with sufficient funds to complete your education at Reed. It cannot be accessed by anyone but you, and only for qualified educational expenses." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a deeper sadness. My grandfather had loved me enough to protect me from my own parents' choices. He'd seen what I hadn't wanted to see. However, the lawyer continued, there's something else you should. No, your grandfather included a letter to be delivered to you if this provision was ever activated. I'd like to arrange a time for you to come to my office. 2 days later, I sat in Mr. Donovan's downtown office, a leather-bound portfolio open before me. Inside was a handwritten letter dated shortly before my grandfather's death. My dear Jessica, if you're reading this, then Robert has made choices. I hoped he wouldn't. Your education was never supposed to be sacrificed for anything or anyone. I built my life on the belief that knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you once you've earned it. Along with this letter comes the means to complete what you've started. Use it wisely. There's also information about another matter, the home on Hawthorne that once belonged to me. The deed transfer to your parents came with conditions they may not have shared with you. If they've compromised your trust fund, they've violated those conditions. Mr. Donovan will explain the legal details, but in simple terms, the house must revert to my estate, to be held in trust for the next generation. You have options now that you didn't have before. Whatever you decide, know that I have always seen your quiet strength and believed in your future. With love and faith, Grandpa William Mr. Donovan waited patiently as I wiped away tears. Then he explained what my grandfather had only hinted at. The Hawthorne house had been transferred to my parents with a clause tied to the educational trusts established for the grandchildren. If either trust was terminated before completion of our education, the house would revert to the estate. Your parents were fully aware of this condition, Mr. Donovan assured me. They signed acknowledgement forms. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. As the injured party and the named contingent beneficiary, you have options. We can enforce the reversion clause immediately, which would effectively mean your parents have been living in a house they no longer own. Or we can notify them of the violation and give them an opportunity to remedy the situation, essentially, to restore your educational fund. My mind raced. Confronting my parents with legal action seemed extreme, but they had left me with nothing. Not just the money, but the casual way they'd dismissed my future in favor of Nathan's. The years of preferential treatment disguised as family decisions. It all crystallized in that moment into a pattern I could no longer ignore. I need time to think, I said finally. Mr. Donovan nodded. Of course, but there's one more thing you should know. I've received notice that your parents have missed 3 mortgage payments on the Hawthorne property. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. I stared at him. Foreclosure? But they told me they were just carrying 2 mortgages temporarily. They've been struggling financially for some time. Your father's business has been underperforming for years. The Seattle investment was meant to salvage their situation, but when that fell through, he spread his hands. The redirecting of your college fund was likely a last-ditch effort to preserve something for your brother. At my expense. Always at my expense. That evening, I drove past the Hawthorne house, slowing as I approached. The lawn needed mowing. The hydrangeas were wilting, small signs of neglect that hinted at larger problems. My childhood home was slipping away, just as my college fund had. I parked down the street and called Megan. I need advice, I said, explaining everything Mr. Donovan had told me. The contingent fund, the house clause, the foreclosure. What are you considering? She asked when I'd finished. I don't know. I could force them to return my money, but it sounds like they don't have it. I could take the house from them through the reversion clause, but what would that accomplish? They'd still have nowhere to live and no money. Or, Megan said slowly, you could let the foreclosure happen naturally. And then, if you wanted to, you could buy the house yourself. With what money? I have a college fund, not a house fund. But you have perfect credit. You have a stable job, and foreclosures sell for way below market value. The idea took root. not as revenge, but as justice, a restoration of balance. Over the next month, I met with a mortgage broker, attended foreclosure seminars, and quietly built a plan. The contingent educational fund would cover my remaining semesters at Reed. My savings and a first-time homebuyer loan could potentially cover a foreclosure purchase, if the price dropped low enough. Meanwhile, I maintained a careful distance from my family. My mother called occasionally, always with excuses about why they couldn't help with my tuition. My father sent a check for $500 with a note that read, "Every bit helps." Nathan texted from Berkeley about his amazing classes and new friends. None of them mentioned the missed mortgage payments or the foreclosure notices I knew they must be receiving. Then came the auction date. The Hawthorne house would be sold on the courthouse steps in 2 weeks. I'd been approved for my loan. My broker had explained the process. I was ready. The morning of the auction dawned clear and sunny, a rarity for Portland in early autumn. I dressed carefully in a blazer and slacks, professional but not flashy. The kind of outfit that said serious buyer rather than desperate daughter. The courthouse steps were crowded with investors and bargain hunters. I recognized a few real estate agents from the foreclosure seminars I'd attended. My parents were nowhere to be seen. Most homeowners couldn't bear to watch their properties being auctioned. The Hawthorne house was the third property called. The auctioneer read out the address and the opening bid. I raised my paddle at the appropriate moments, countering when necessary, staying within my predetermined limit. The back and forth was faster than I'd expected, but I kept my focus. When the hammer fell, the house was mine, for 60% of its market value. I signed papers in a daze, the reality of what I'd done not fully sinking in. By afternoon, I held the deed to my childhood home, the home my parents had sacrificed my education to try to save. The home they were still living in, unaware that their daughter now owned it. Mr. Donovan advised me to send a formal notice through his office. It will be more official, less emotional, he suggested. But this was personal. It needed to be face-to-face. I drove to the Hawthorne house that evening, the deed in my bag. The porch light was on. My mother's car was in the driveway. I knocked instead of using my old key. She answered with a dish towel in her hands, her expression shifting from confusion to forced brightness. "Jessica, what a surprise! Come in, come in." The house smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh paint. They'd been sprucing it up, perhaps hoping for a miracle that would save their home. My father appeared from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose. "Jessie," he said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I know about the foreclosure," I said, stepping into the living room. "I know you've been lying about your financial situation." They exchanged glances. My mother sank onto the sofa. "We didn't want to worry you kids. We're handling it." "No, you're not," I said. "The house was auctioned today." My father's face paled. "Already? But we were told—" "I bought it," I interrupted, pulling out the deed. "The Hawthorne house belongs to me now." Silence fell, heavy and complete. My mother stared at the document in my hand as if it might bite her. My father's expression hardened from shock to anger. "This is how you repay us? For raising you? For giving you everything?" "Everything except what you promised me. Everything. Except respect for my future." "We were trying to save the family home," my mother protested. "By sacrificing my education, by lying to me, by choosing Nathan's fresh start over my completion." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not here for a fight. I'm here to tell you that you have 30 days to vacate the property." My father stood abruptly. "You can't be serious. This is our home." "It's my home now," I corrected him. "Just like my college fund was my future until you decided otherwise." "Where are we supposed to go?" my mother asked, tears welling in her eyes. "You'll figure something out," I said, echoing her words from that night at dinner. "You're resourceful." I left the deed on the coffee table and walked out, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. In the car, I finally allowed myself to cry, not from sadness or guilt, but from the release of years of being the afterthought, the responsible one who would always understand, always accommodate, always sacrifice. The next few weeks were difficult. My parents alternated between angry calls and tearful pleas. Nathan tried to mediate, suggesting I let them stay as tenants. Friends who heard only their side of the story sent judgmental messages. But others, Megan, my advisor at Reed, even Mr. Donovan, understood that this wasn't about cruelty. It was about consequences. On moving day, I arrived with a small U-Haul and a few friends. My parents had already gone, leaving behind furniture they couldn't fit, in their new apartment and decades of accumulated possessions they couldn't bear to sort through. They'd taken the family photos but left my academic awards in a box in the attic. They'd emptied the master bedroom but left my childhood room untouched, as if it had been forgotten years ago. As I walked through the empty rooms, footsteps echoing, on hardwood floors my grandfather had installed, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, only a quiet certainty that I had done what was necessary, not just for practical reasons, but for my own sense of worth. That evening, I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "They're settled in the apartment. It's small but decent. Dad's looking for work. Mom's talking about selling her jewelry." I didn't respond immediately. Then another text arrived. "I understand why you did. I would have done the same." 6 months later, the Hawthorne house had new floors, fresh paint, and tenants who paid rent that covered the mortgage with a small profit. I lived in a modest apartment near Reed, focusing on completing my degree. The contingent educational fund covered my tuition and books, just as my grandfather had intended. My parents and I maintained a careful distance. Holiday cards, occasional text messages, but no invitations or visits. Nathan graduated from Berkeley with honors and a job offer from a tech company in Portland. He asked if we could meet for coffee. Over lattes at a shop near the Willamette River, he studied me with new eyes. "You know what's weird? I always thought you were the quiet one, the pushover, but you were just picking your battles." I smiled slightly. "Some things matter more than others. Like education. Like promises. Like respect." I stirred my coffee. "Like not being the perpetual afterthought in your own family." He nodded slowly. "Mom and Dad are different now, humbler. Dad's working at that hardware store on Division. Mom's teaching piano lessons. They don't talk about appearances anymore." "Are they happy?" I don't know if happy is the right word. They're real. For the first time, maybe ever. I thought about that conversation often in the years that followed, about how sometimes losing everything material makes space for gaining something immaterial, how consequences aren't always about punishment, but about restoration and growth. I graduated with my environmental science degree and went on to complete a master's program. The Hawthorne house remained mine, a rental property that helped fund my education, and later served as collateral for a small business loan when I started my sustainability consulting firm. 5 years after the foreclosure, I received a letter from my mother. Inside was a check for the exact amount of my original college fund, along with a note that read, "This doesn't fix the past, but it acknowledges it. We were wrong. We're sorry. When you're ready, we'd like to try again." I didn't cash the check immediately. It sat on my desk for weeks while I considered what it represented. Not just money, but recognition. Not just apology, but change. Eventually, I drove to their apartment. With the check and a proposal, the money would establish a new trust, not for me or for Nathan, but for educational grants for first-generation college students. My parents would help administer it, a way to turn our family's complicated history into something constructive. They agreed through tears and tentative smiles. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not yet. But it was a beginning, a new foundation built on the ashes of what had collapsed. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from those who should have protected us. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from standing alone. And sometimes, justice isn't about winning or losing, but about creating the space for everyone to finally grow into their best selves. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-respect? Between what's comfortable and what's right? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, subscribe for more real conversations about family, boundaries, and the courage to create your own path. The manila folder sat heavy in my lap as I stared up at the imposing glass front of First National Bank. The quarterly statement inside showed only $320 remaining in my account, not even enough for textbooks, let alone tuition. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights trying to understand what went wrong, recalculating figures until the numbers blurred before my eyes. But the truth was painfully simple. The money wasn't there. When I pushed through the revolving doors, the blast of air conditioning hit my face like a reprieve from the August heat. The marble-floored lobby echoed with hushed conversations and the clicking of heels. I straightened my shoulders and approached the reception desk. "I'd like to speak with someone about my educational trust account," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I believe there's been a mistake." The receptionist directed me to a waiting area where potted palms created the illusion of privacy. 20 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with a sleek bob and tortoiseshell glasses called my name. "Ms. Taylor, I'm Patricia Winters, Trust Administrator." She extended a manicured hand. "Let's talk in my office." Her office was a testament to corporate success. Awards on the walls, family photos arranged just so, a view of Mount Hood on clear days like today. I took a seat across from her desk and handed over my folder. "I'm trying to access funds from my educational trust for my senior year at Reed," I explained. "My parents established it when I was born. According to my records, there should be just over $48,000 remaining." Ms. Winters reviewed the documents, her expression carefully neutral. After a moment, she turned to her computer and began typing. The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the soft click of her keyboard. "Ms. Taylor," she finally said, folding her hands on the desk. "The trust in question was modified approximately 3 months ago. The funds were reallocated to another beneficiary." "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "There must be some mix-up." She turned her monitor so I could see the screen. There it was in sterile black and white. Transfer authorization signed by trustees Robert Taylor and Diana Taylor. Beneficiary change from Jessica Ann Taylor to Nathan Robert Taylor. My brother. My parents had given my college fund to my brother. "The trustees, your parents, have full authority to modify the beneficiary until the primary beneficiary reaches age 25, Ms. Winters explained, her tone softening slightly. "I understand this must come as a shock." A shock. The word seemed absurdly inadequate for the earthquake tearing through my reality. I'd worked so hard, maintaining a perfect GPA, taking extra shifts at the campus cafe, securing competitive internships, all while believing the financial foundation was secure. "Was there a notification?" I managed to ask. "Did anyone contact me about this change?" "Our records indicate a notification was sent to your home address in Hawthorne. We don't typically send these to campus addresses unless specifically requested." Of course, the letter would have gone to my parents' house where they could easily intercept it. They'd had 3 months to tell me. 3 months to prepare me for the fact that they'd pulled the rug out from under my future. Instead, they'd said nothing, letting me plan my senior year under the delusion that everything was on track. Mrs. Winters seemed to sense my distress. "Would you like a glass of water? Or do you need a moment?" I shook my head, gathering the scattered papers back into my folder with trembling hands. "No, thank you. I think I have what I need." Outside, I sat in my car for a long time, keys in the ignition but engine silent. The campus housing deadline was in 2 weeks. Tuition was due in 3. The environmental policy internship I'd spent 2 years positioning myself for started in September. Everything was unraveling, and I couldn't even begin to see how to knit it back together. I drove aimlessly, eventually finding myself on the familiar streets of the Hawthorne district. My parents' craftsman-style home, the house I'd grown up in, looked the same as always. The porch swing still hung slightly crooked. The blue hydrangeas I'd helped plant years ago still bloomed along the front walkway. It all seemed so normal, so unchanged while my world had just imploded. My mother's gardening gloves and trowel lay abandoned by a half-weeded flower bed. The garage door was open, revealing my father's weekend project, restoring a vintage mahogany desk. There was no sign of Nathan's sleek silver Audi, the one they'd bought him after he totaled his previous car, his third in 5 years. I should confront them. I should demand answers. I should scream and rage and make them understand what they'd done. But as I sat there, engine idling, a bone-deep exhaustion settled over me. I wasn't ready. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of the damage. Back at my apartment, I spread my financial life across the kitchen table. Scholarship documents, student loan applications, bank statements, work schedules. The grim reality took shape. Without the trust fund, I was approximately $22,000 short for my final year. Too much for additional loans this late in the game. Too much to earn before the payment deadlines. My roommate Megan found me there hours later, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance no matter how many times I adjusted the numbers. "Jess? What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything. The empty trust account, the transfer to Nathan, the impending deadlines. That's theft," she said finally, her voice vibrating with indignation. "They can't just take your college fund and give it to your brother." Apparently, they can. Legally. Anyway, I pushed a strand of hair from my face. The question is why? Why now, when I'm so close to finishing? And why not even tell me? "You need to call them," Megan insisted. "Right now. Make them explain." She was right. I reached for my phone and dialed my parents' number, heart hammering against my ribs. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice bright with practiced cheer. "Jessica, what a nice surprise. We were just talking about you at dinner. Dad grilled those salmon fillets you like. We saved you some if you want to stop by." The casual normality of it made my stomach turn. "I'm not calling about salmon, Mom. I'm calling about my college fund." The silence that followed was brief, but telling. "Oh," she said finally. "That." "Yes, that. The money that was supposed to pay for my senior year. The money you and Dad apparently gave to Nathan without bothering to tell me. Honey, it's complicated. Your father and I made a decision that was best for the family as a whole. I needed to graduate college," I cut in. "I needed the money you promised me my entire life. I needed you to keep your word. These things aren't always black and white, Jessica." Her voice had taken on that patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Your brother has a chance at Berkeley Business School. Do you know what kind of opportunity that is? What kind of doors it will open? And what about my doors? What about the environmental policy internship I've been working toward for 2 years? What about my graduate school applications? You've always been so responsible, so capable," she said, as if this were somehow a compliment rather than an admission that they took me for granted. "We knew you'd figure something out. Nathan needs more support. He always has." The inequality of it hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent my entire life being the good child, the one who caused no trouble, who met every expectation, who needed minimal attention because I handled things myself. And this was my reward, to have my future sacrificed on the altar of my brother's latest whim. "I need that money back," I said simply, "or at least enough to cover this year. My tuition is due in 3 weeks." "It's not that simple, Jessica. The money's already been paid to Berkeley. First semester's tuition and housing deposit. It's non-refundable. Then you and Dad need to replace it. Take out a loan. Use your savings. Sell something. I don't care how you do it, but I need that money to graduate. Another silence, longer this time. I heard muffled voices, as if she'd covered the phone to confer with my father. When she came back on the line, her voice was tight. We don't have it, Jessica. Your father's business has been struggling. The Seattle property investment fell through. We're already behind on the mortgage. The money from your trust fund it was all we had left. The admission left me speechless. Not only had they stolen my college fund, but they'd done it because they were in financial trouble. They'd never bothered to mention. They'd been maintaining the fiction of stability while everything crumbled beneath the surface. You should have told me, I said finally. You should have explained. We could have figured something out together. We didn't want to worry you with adult problems. My father's voice suddenly cut in. He must have taken the phone from my mother. And frankly, Jessica, your attitude right now is exactly why we made this decision without consulting you. You're being selfish. This is about what's best for the family, not just for you. Selfish. The accusation landed like a slap. All those years of being the responsible one, of putting everyone else's needs before my own. And now I was selfish, for expecting them to honor their commitment to my education. I have to go, I said, suddenly too tired to continue the conversation. But this isn't over. Jessica, wait, my father began, but I ended the call. Megan had heard enough of the conversation to understand. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, her expression a mix of outrage and concern. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. Apply for emergency loans. Talk to the financial aid office. See if I can defer a semester, though that would mean losing my internship. The options were all bad, each one a compromise that would derail the carefully constructed path I'd been following. You could stay with me if you need to cut costs, Megan offered. My sister's moving out next month. Her room will be empty. I squeezed her hand, grateful for the support, but knowing it wouldn't be enough. The problem wasn't just housing, it was the entire financial structure of my final year collapsing. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake replaying the conversation with my parents, filling in the gaps of what they hadn't said. If they were behind on the mortgage, things were worse than they'd admitted. If all they'd had left was my college fund, they must have exhausted every other resource. But none of that explained why they hadn't at least warned me, given me time to prepare, to seek alternatives. The next morning, I called the financial aid office at Reed as soon as they opened. The advisor listened sympathetically to my situation, but didn't have much to offer. Without your parents' financial support, your aid package will need to be recalculated, she explained. But this late in the year, most additional funds have already been allocated. You can apply for emergency loans, but they won't cover the full gap. What about deferring for a semester? Would my scholarship still be available in spring? Possibly, but I should warn you, deferment can affect internship eligibility and graduation sequencing, and there's no guarantee that more aid will be available next semester. I hung up feeling even more adrift. The options were narrowing by the hour. That afternoon, as I was sorting through loan applications in the campus library, my phone lit up with a text from Nathan. Hey sis, got some awesome news. Just got approved. For an apartment right near Berkeley campus. Top floor, amazing view. Talk soon. Attached was a photo of him grinning in front of a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows, the San Francisco skyline visible in the background. His new life, bought and paid for with my future. I stared at the image until my vision blurred. Then, with deliberate calm, I typed, "Did you know where the money for your Berkeley adventure came from?" His response came almost immediately. "What do you mean?" "My college fund, Nathan." Mom and Dad emptied my college fund to pay for your tuition and fancy apartment. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, that can't be right. They told me it came from the Seattle property deal. The Seattle deal fell through. They're behind on the mortgage. They took my money because it was all they had left. Another long pause. Jess, I swear I didn't know. I would never have agreed to that. I believed him. For all his faults, Nathan wasn't deliberately cruel. He was just chronically self-absorbed, never looking beyond his immediate wants to consider their impact on others. Our parents had nurtured that quality in him his entire life, always insulating him from consequences, always making excuses, always finding someone else to bear the burden of his choices. Usually me. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I didn't have an answer for him. I didn't have an answer for myself. That evening, I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The truth was settling in my bones. No one was coming to fix this. Not my parents, who had created the problem. Not Nathan, who was its unwitting beneficiary. Not the financial aid office, with its depleted emergency funds. Not the bank, with its immovable deadlines. If I was going to save my education, I would have to do it myself. Like always. The next day, I visited 3 more banks, exploring private student loan options. The interest rates were punishing, the terms inflexible, and most required a co-signer with good credit, something my parents apparently no longer had. Each rejection narrowed my path further. As I walked back to my car after the final appointment, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost declined it, too emotionally drained for another conversation, but something made me answer. "Is this Jessica Taylor?" The voice was male, professional, vaguely familiar. "Yes, speaking." "This is Elliot Donovan. I was your grandfather's attorney. I've been trying to reach you regarding a matter of some importance." My grandfather had passed away 3 years earlier. I hadn't heard from his attorney since the reading of the will, where we'd learned that most of his estate had been left to my father, with small personal bequests to me and Nathan. "I apologize for the unexpected call," Mr. Donovan continued. "But I recently became aware of changes to your educational trust account that have triggered certain provisions in your grandfather's will." A flutter of hope stirred in my chest. "What kind of provisions?" "Your grandfather established what we call a contingent educational fund. It becomes available only if the primary educational trusts he established for his grandchildren are compromised in some way." Compromised? Redirected, depleted, or otherwise made unavailable to the intended beneficiary. His tone was carefully neutral. William Taylor was very specific about his wishes. Education was a priority for him. I remembered my grandfather's constant encouragement of my academic interests, the books he'd given me, the science museums he'd taken me to, his genuine engagement with my schoolwork. He'd been a self-made man who valued knowledge above all else. "So there's another account?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Yes. A secondary trust in your name, with sufficient funds to complete your education at Reed. It cannot be accessed by anyone but you, and only for qualified educational expenses." Relief washed over me so intensely that my knees felt weak. I sank onto a nearby bench, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "However," Mr. Donovan continued, "there's something else you should know. When your grandfather created this contingency, he also included a letter to be delivered to you if the provision was ever activated. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come to my office." We arranged a meeting for the following afternoon. As I drove home, my mind raced with questions. Why had my grandfather anticipated this situation? What did he know about my parents that I hadn't? And what could be in the letter that required an in-person meeting? The offices of Donovan and Associates occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building with views of the Willamette River. The reception area featured dark wood paneling and leather chairs that spoke of old money and discretion. I gave my name to the receptionist and waited, too restless to sit, instead studying the black and white photographs of Portland landmarks that lined the walls. Mr. Donovan himself came to greet me, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. I recognized him from the will reading, though we'd barely spoken then. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Taylor," he said, leading me through a maze of corridors to a conference room where a leather portfolio lay centered on the polished table. "Please, have a seat." I perched on the edge of a chair, hands folded tightly in my lap. Mr. Donovan opened the portfolio to reveal a sealed envelope bearing my name in familiar handwriting, my grandfather's neat architectural script. "Before you read this, I should explain the legal context," he said. "Your grandfather was a remarkably foresighted man. He established multiple layers of protection for his estate, particularly regarding educational provisions for his grandchildren." "Why would he need to do that?" I asked. "Didn't he trust my parents to honor his wishes?" Mr. Donovan chose his words carefully. "Let's say he understood certain patterns in your family dynamic. The contingent trust was his way of ensuring that regardless of other circumstances, your education would not be compromised." He slid the envelope across the table. "Take your time. I'll wait outside." Alone in the conference room, I broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "My dear Jessica, if you're reading this letter, then a situation I hoped would never arise has come to pass. Your primary educational trust has been compromised, likely by your parents redirecting the funds I intended for your schooling. First, please know that your education is secure. The contingent trust I've established contains sufficient funds to complete your degree at Reed and support reasonable graduate studies thereafter. Mr. Donovan has the details and will assist you in accessing these funds. Now for the more difficult matter. I love your father. He is my son after all. But I have always recognized his weaknesses. Robert has a pattern of financial mismanagement and a tendency to favor Nathan's immediate desires over your long-term needs. I had hoped that establishing the primary trusts would prevent this pattern from affecting your future, but I see now that additional measures were necessary. There is another aspect to this situation that you should be aware of. The Hawthorne House, your childhood home, was transferred to your parents with specific conditions attached. One of those conditions was that the educational trusts I established for you and Nathan would be maintained intact until your education was complete. By redirecting your trust funds, they have violated this condition. This violation activates another contingency in my estate plan. The property at 3842 Hawthorne Boulevard legally reverts to my estate, to be held in trust for the next generation. In practical terms, this means your parents are currently living in a house they no longer own. As the injured party in this situation, you have options that Mr. Donovan will explain in detail. You can enforce the reversion clause immediately, or you can allow your parents time to remedy their violation by restoring your educational fund. Whatever you decide, know that this was never about punishment, but about protection. I established these measures not to control from beyond the grave, but to ensure that the values I hold dear, education, fairness, keeping one's word, would be upheld even if I was no longer present to advocate for them. You have always been more than your parents could see, Jessica. Your quiet strength, your persistence, your commitment to doing what's right rather than what's easy. These qualities will serve you well in the days ahead. With love and confidence, Grandpa William. I read the letter twice, then a third time, allowing its implications to sink in. My grandfather had seen it all. The pattern of favoritism, the financial irresponsibility, the likelihood that my education would eventually be sacrificed for Nathan's benefit. He'd created not just a safety net, but a mechanism for accountability. When Mr. Donovan returned, I had questions ready. What exactly does it mean that the house reverts to the estate, and what are my options? He sat across from me, folding, his hands on the table. The deed to the Hawthorne property contains what we call a reverter clause. If certain conditions aren't met, in this case maintaining the educational trusts as specified, ownership legally reverts to your grandfather's estate. So my parents no longer own their home? Technically, no. The title would revert to the estate, which according to your grandfather's wishes would then be held in trust for the benefit of his grandchildren until certain conditions are met. And my options? As the wronged party identified in the contingency clause, you have several choices. You can enforce the reverter immediately, which would essentially mean your parents are living in a house they no longer have legal right to occupy. You can give them notice and a timeline to vacate, or you can offer them terms, such as restoring your educational fund, that would allow them to remedy the breach and retain ownership. My head was spinning with the implications. The power dynamic had shifted completely. After years of being at the mercy of my parents' decisions, I suddenly held leverage I'd never anticipated. "There's one more thing you should know," Mr. Donovan added. "I recently received notice that your parents have missed several mortgage payments on the Hawthorne property. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings." I stared at him. Foreclosure? But they told me they were just carrying 2 mortgages temporarily until the Seattle property sold. "They've been experiencing financial difficulties for some time. Your father's business has been struggling for years. The Seattle investment was meant to be a lifeline, but when that fell through," he spread his hands, "the redirecting of your college fund appears to have been a desperate attempt to salvage something for your brother before everything collapsed. At my expense. Always at my expense." "What happens to the reverter clause if the bank forecloses?" I asked. "That's a complex legal question. In simplified terms, the foreclosure would likely take precedence, but the estate, meaning you and your brother as beneficiaries, would have certain rights regarding any proceeds after the mortgage." Is satisfied. He paused. "There is another possibility, though it may not have occurred to you." "What's that?" "You could potentially purchase the property at the foreclosure auction. With your perfect credit and the backing of your educational trust as collateral, for a loan, you might be in a position to acquire the house at below market value." The idea hit me like a thunderbolt. Not as revenge, but as justice, a restoration of balance. "I'd like to explore that option," I said quietly. Over the next weeks, I met with mortgage brokers, attended foreclosure seminars, and quietly built a plan. The contingent educational fund would cover my remaining semesters at Reed. My savings and a first-time homebuyer loan could potentially cover a foreclosure purchase, if the price dropped low enough. Meanwhile, I maintained a careful distance from my family. My mother called occasionally, always with excuses about why they couldn't help with my tuition. My father sent a check for $500 with a note that read, "Every bit helps." Nathan texted from Berkeley about his amazing classes and new friends. None of them mentioned the missed mortgage payments or the foreclosure notices I knew they must be receiving. Through Mr. Donovan, I learned the date of the foreclosure auction. The Hawthorne house would be sold on the courthouse steps in 3 weeks. I'd been pre-approved for my loan. My broker had coached me through the process. I was as ready as I could be. The night before the auction, I drove past the Hawthorne house one last time. The lawn needed mowing. The hydrangeas drooped from lack of water. The porch light was out. Small signs of neglect that hinted at larger issues. My childhood home was fading, just as my parents' facade of financial stability had. I parked down the street and called Megan. "I'm doing it tomorrow," I said simply. She knew the plan. "Are you sure, Jess? It's a big step." "I'm sure. It's not about revenge. It's about consequences. It's about not being the only one who pays for their choices anymore." After a moment, she said, "I'll be there. Whatever you need." I slept surprisingly well that night, as if making the decision had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for years, not just since discovering the empty trust account, but since I first understood, somewhere in childhood, that the rules in our family were different for me than for Nathan. That I was expected to be responsible, while he was allowed to fail repeatedly without consequences. That my achievements were taken for granted, while his smallest efforts were celebrated. Tomorrow, That pattern would finally break. Morning light filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long rectangles of sunshine across the marble floor. I adjusted my blazer and checked my watch. Still 30 minutes before the auction was scheduled to begin. Already clusters of people with coffee cups and manila folders gathered near the steps, their voices a low murmur of business discussions and property assessments. These were professionals, real estate investors, house flippers, property management companies, people who did this every week. And then there was me, a 23-year-old college student about to bid on her parents' foreclosed home. Megan appeared at my side, holding 2 steaming cups. "Thought you could use this," she said, pressing one into my hand. "It's that vanilla latte you like." "Thanks." I took a grateful sip, the warmth and caffeine steadying my nerves. "What time is James coming?" "He's parking now." James was Megan's boyfriend, a law student who'd offered moral support and had attended several foreclosure auctions as part of his internship. He'd been coaching me on protocols and bidding strategies for the past week. "Good morning, bidders." A court official appeared at the top of the stairs, clipboard in hand. "We'll begin registration now. Please have your bidder deposits and identification." "Ready." I joined the line, documentation prepared in a folder labeled with the property address, 3842 Hawthorne Boulevard. When I reached the registration table, the clerk barely glanced at me as she checked my cashier's check and ID, then handed me a numbered paddle. "First time?" she asked, noticing how tightly I was gripping the paddle. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled slightly. "Just remember, once the gavel falls, it's final. No buyer's remorse allowed. And good luck." By 10 o'clock, the auction was underway. I stood against a pillar, Megan and James flanking me like bodyguards. Property after property was called, bid on, and sold in a brisk matter-of-fact process that reduced homes and lives to lot numbers and opening bids. Next item, number 47 to 82, single-family residence at 3842 Hawthorne Boulevard, craftsman style, built 1922. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, starting bid $275,000 to satisfy the lien. Do I have $275,000? My childhood home, reduced to a property, listing and a debt figure. I raised my paddle slightly, not trusting my voice. $275,000 from bidder number 23. Do I have $280,000? Another paddle went up across the room. A man in a gray suit who looked like he'd done this 1,000 times. $280,000 from bidder 16. Do I have $285,000? I raised my paddle again. My pre-approval was for $350,000 maximum, a figure that factored in the property's market value of approximately $475,000 less foreclosure discount. I had room to maneuver, but not unlimited resources. The bidding continued, a rhythmic back and forth between me and the man in the gray suit, with occasional interest from a woman in a red blazer who dropped out at $315,000. By the time we reached $330,000, it was down to just me and the man in the suit, whose bored expression suggested this was just another investment property to him. $335,000 from bidder 23. Do I have $340,000? The man in the suit consulted something on his phone, then slowly shook his head. Going once at $335,000. Going twice at $335,000. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Sold to bidder 23 for $335,000. Just like that, I owned my childhood home. The place where I'd taken my first steps, lost my first tooth, studied for my SATs. The place my parents had just lost because they'd prioritized Nathan's opportunities over mine once too often. The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and financial arrangements. By early afternoon, I held the deed to 3842 Hawthorne Boulevard in my trembling hands. I'd done it. The house was mine. Not my parents', not the bank's. Mine. "What now?" Megan asked as we walked to the parking garage, the folder of property documents tucked securely in my bag. "Now I go home," I said. "The other home, I mean. I need to figure out what comes next." Back at my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the deed. The reality of what I'd done was sinking in, bringing with it not the vindictive satisfaction I'd half expected, but something more complex. A mixture of sadness, resolution, and a strange sense of freedom. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "Hey, tried calling Mom and Dad, but no answer. Everything okay?" I hadn't spoken to my brother since our exchange about the college fund. Part of me wanted to tell him what had just happened, but another part knew he should hear it from our parents first. "You should talk to them directly," I texted back. "There have been some financial developments." His response came quickly. "What kind of developments? You're being weird, Jess." "They lost the house, Nate. Foreclosure. It was auctioned today." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before his reply. Holy shit. Where are they going to live? Why didn't anyone tell me? The same reason no one told me my college fund was gone, I guess. Our family doesn't communicate about important things. I set the phone aside, not ready for the barrage of questions that would inevitably follow. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching what came next: the legal process for taking possession of a foreclosed property, the timeline for current occupants to vacate, the resources available for people facing housing instability. At some point, I would have to face my parents. They would learn that I was the new owner of their home, and I would have to decide what terms to set. But for tonight, I allowed myself to simply absorb the fact that after years of being the one who adjusted, accommodated, and sacrificed, I finally held the power to establish boundaries they couldn't ignore. The following morning, I met with Mr. Donovan to discuss next steps. His office felt familiar now, the leather chairs and mahogany desk no longer intimidating, but oddly comforting in their solidity. "Congratulations on the successful bid," he said, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. "Everything appears to be in order. The property is legally yours." "What about my parents? How and when do I notify them?" He leaned back, removing his glasses. "Legally, they'll receive official notice from the court within 5 business days. As the new owner, you're entitled to take possession after that notification period, though it's customary to allow current occupants reasonable time to relocate, typically 30 days. And if they refuse to leave, then you'd initiate formal eviction proceedings." He studied my face. "But I sense that's not the direction you're hoping this will take." "I don't know what I'm hoping for anymore," I admitted. "Part of me wants them to understand how it feels to have the rug pulled out from under you. Another part just wants acknowledgement, recognition that what they did wasn't okay. Have you considered offering them a lease arrangement? They could stay as tenants, paying you rent that could help cover your educational expenses." The irony of that suggestion wasn't lost on me. My parents, paying rent to live in what they'd always considered their home, with the money going toward the education they'd promised to fund and then abandoned. "I'll think about it," I said, though something in me rebelled against the idea. A lease would mean ongoing entanglement, continued opportunities for manipulation, an extension of the dynamics that had led us here. "Whatever you decide," Mr. Donovan said, "remember that this is now a business matter, not just a family one. Document everything, communicate in writing when possible, and don't make decisions based on guilt or obligation." I left his office with a clearer sense of the legal landscape, but still uncertain about the emotional one. Would seeing my parents face-to-face make things better or worse? Would confrontation bring clarity, or just more pain? I decided to take the afternoon to visit the property, my property, while my parents were likely to be at work. I needed to see it through new eyes, as an owner rather than a daughter. The Hawthorne house looked much the same as it had the last time I'd driven by, though in the bright light of day, the signs of neglect were more apparent. Paint peeled near the roofline, a gutter sagged at one corner. The once immaculate lawn showed patches of brown. I parked across the street, not yet ready to approach. From this vantage point, I could see the window of what had been my bedroom, second floor, facing the street, with the branch of an old maple tree brushing against the glass. How many nights had I fallen asleep to that gentle tapping? How many mornings had I woken to sunlight filtering through those panes? A car turned onto the street, my mother's silver Volvo. She was home early. I watched as she pulled into the driveway, gathered grocery bags from the passenger seat, and walked to the front door, keys jingling in her hand. She didn't notice me sitting across the street, just as she hadn't noticed so many things over the years. Before I could decide whether to approach or drive away, my phone rang. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. "Jess, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tight with confusion and accusation. "Mom just called me sobbing. She said something about you buying the house at auction? That can't be right." I took a deep breath. "It's right, Nate. I bought the house at the foreclosure auction yesterday." "Why would you do that? How could you even afford it?" "It turns out Grandpa Will set up a contingency fund for me in case something happened to my college trust. When Mom and Dad emptied my account to pay for your Berkeley tuition, it triggered the release of that fund. I didn't mention the reverter clause or the letter. One revelation at a time." "So what? This is some kind of revenge? Taking their house because they took your college fund?" "It's not that simple, Nathan. They've been in financial trouble for years and never told either of us. They're behind on both mortgages. Dad's business is failing. They've been maintaining this facade of success while everything crumbled behind the scenes." Silence filled the line as he processed this. "What are you going to do? Evict them?" I watched as my mother disappeared into the house, the door closing behind her. "I don't know yet, but I'm tired of being the only one who bears the consequences of their choices. Jess, they're our parents." "Yes, and they chose to empty my college fund without warning me. They chose to lie about their financial situation. They chose to protect you at my expense, over and over again." My voice broke slightly. "When do I get to make choices that protect me?" The silence stretched between us, filled with all the years of imbalance, all the accumulated weight of being the responsible one, the forgotten one, the one who was expected to understand and accommodate without question. "I didn't ask them to do this," Nathan said finally, his voice smaller. "I know you didn't. But you benefited from it, and you never questioned why things always seemed to work out for you while I was left scrambling." I sighed. "Look, I'm not blaming you for their decisions, but I need you to understand that this isn't a simple case of me being vindictive. This is about finally establishing consequences for choices that have affected my entire future." After we hung up, I sat in my car a while longer, watching the house, my house, and gathering my courage. I hadn't planned to confront my parents today, but with my mother already home and the conversation with Nathan still echoing in my mind, it seemed inevitable. I crossed the street slowly, each step feeling weighted with significance. The walkway to the porch was lined with river rocks my father and I had collected from the Willamette one summer weekend. The porch swing where I'd read countless books still hung from its chains, though the cushions had faded from bright blue to a washed-out gray. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. A small but deliberate choice. I was no longer walking into their home. They were receiving me in mine. My mother opened the door, her face registering shock, then wariness. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect hair disheveled. "Jessica, I wasn't expecting you." "Can I come in?" I asked, the formality strange between us. She stepped back, gesturing me inside. The familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and cinnamon candles enveloped me. The entry hall looked the same. Family photos arranged on the wall, the antique umbrella stand by the door, the bowl where keys and loose change accumulated. "Your father isn't home," she said, leading me to the living room. "He's at the bank, trying to—" Her voice trailed off. trying to stop a foreclosure that's already happened, I finished for her. She sank onto the sofa, hands twisting in her lap. Nathan called. He said you bought the house. Is that true? Yes. How? Where did you get that kind of money? Grandpa Will set up a contingency fund in case something happened to my college trust. It seems he anticipated that you and Dad might make choices that would compromise my education. Her face paled. Jessica, you have to understand. We were desperate. The Seattle property was supposed to solve everything, but when that fell through, you decided my education was the most expendable asset. It wasn't like that. Nathan had this opportunity at Berkeley. The deposit was due. We thought we could replace your fund before you needed it for fall semester. With what money, Mom? You're behind on both mortgages. Dad's business is struggling. Where exactly was this replacement money going to come from? She had no answer. Just the same expression of helpless confusion she'd worn whenever confronted with difficult realities. My mother had always been the family's emotional barometer rather than its practical problem solver. She felt things deeply, but rarely translated those feelings into effective action. What are you going to do with the house? She asked finally. It was the question I'd been asking myself since the gavel fell at the auction. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Simply the security of knowing my education was protected? Or something more? A fundamental shift in the power dynamics that had defined our family for as long as I could remember. I haven't decided yet, I said truthfully. But legally, you and Dad have 30 days to vacate the property. 30 days? Her voice rose in panic. Jessica, we can't possibly find a place and move in a month. Where would we go? What about all our things? You had months of notice about the foreclosure. You chose not to act, not to plan, not to tell me what was happening. My voice remained steady despite the emotion churning beneath. Just like you chose not to tell me you'd emptied my college fund. We were trying to protect you. No, you were trying to protect yourselves from having to face the consequences of your choices. I stood, suddenly needing space. I'm not here to negotiate today. I'm here to inform you of the timeline, 30 days. I walked to the door, each step an effort not to look back, not to soften in the face of her distress. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about boundaries, about finally requiring my parents to experience the weight of their decisions rather than shifting that burden to me. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the lawn. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply until the trembling in my limbs subsided. I hadn't expected it to be easy, but the reality of seeing my mother's fear and confusion had been harder than anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. We need to talk. Coming to your apartment tonight. I replied with a simple, no, I'll meet you at a neutral location, Riverfront Coffee Shop, 7 p.m. The coffee shop sat on the banks of the Willamette, its wide windows offering views of the water and the city skyline beyond. I arrived early, securing a corner table with some privacy. The barista, a former classmate from Reed, raised an eyebrow at my businesslike attire, but asked no questions as she prepared my usual latte. My father arrived precisely at 7, his normally commanding presence diminished by the slump of his shoulders and the shadows under his eyes. He spotted me immediately, threading his way between tables without stopping to order. Jessica. He sat across from me, hands clasped on the table. Your mother told me you came by the house today. Yes. She's distraught, barely coherent. Something about you giving us 30 days to vacate? His tone suggested he found this too absurd to be credible. That's correct. As the new legal owner of the property, I'm requiring you and Mom to vacate within 30 days. He stared at me, incredulity giving way to a flicker of anger. You can't be serious. This is our home. We've lived there for 25 years. And you would have continued living there if you hadn't defaulted on the mortgage. Or if you... Hadn't emptied my college fund instead of being honest about your financial troubles. We made decisions based on what was best for the family, he said, his voice hardening. Nathan had an opportunity that couldn't wait. Berkeley doesn't hold spots. And my education? My opportunity to complete my degree on time? To take the internship I've been working toward for 2 years? Was that not equally important? You've always been more resourceful than your brother. More independent. We knew you'd find a way. There it was again, the familiar refrain. Because I'd proven capable, I was expected to manage on my own. Because Nathan had a history of struggling, he received the support and resources that should have been divided equally. I did find a way, I said quietly, but not the way you expected. Not by settling for less or compromising my future. By purchasing our home out from under us. By threatening to make your own parents homeless. His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. Is that the kind of person you've become, Jessica? I've become the kind of person who sets boundaries, who requires accountability, who doesn't accept being sacrificed for someone else's benefit. I met his gaze steadily. I learned that from Grandpa Will, not from you. The mention of my grandfather shifted something in his expression, a fleeting vulnerability quickly masked by defensiveness. My father always played favorites. He never understood the pressures of running a business, supporting a family. He understood keeping your word. He understood fairness. I took a sip of my cooling latte. He also understood your tendencies well enough to create safeguards in case you did exactly what you ended up doing. My father's face flushed. This is about money, then? Fine. When the Seattle property finally sells, this isn't about money, I interrupted. It's about choices and consequences. It's about years of being treated as less important, less deserving of consideration than Nathan. It's about finally saying no to that pattern. We sat in tense silence, the gentle acoustic music of the coffee shop a jarring counterpoint to the emotional undercurrents flowing between us. Outside the windows, the river moved steadily onward, indifferent to our human dramas. What do you want, Jessica? My father asked finally, his voice quieter. What would it take to resolve this situation? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the auction. What did I really want? Not just to punish, not just to protect my education, but beyond that, what outcome would bring closure to this painful chapter? I want 3 things, I said after a moment. First, I want you and Mom to acknowledge, really acknowledge, the pattern of favoritism that's defined our family dynamics for as long as I can remember. Not excuses, not justifications, but genuine recognition of how your choices have affected me. He nodded slowly, though his expression remained guarded. Second, I want you to tell Nathan the complete truth about the family finances, including the fact that his Berkeley opportunity came at the expense of my senior year. No more shielding him from reality. And third, I want you to move out of the Hawthorne house, but I'm willing to extend the timeline to 60 days instead of 30, and I'm willing to help with moving expenses, not because I owe you anything, but because I choose to offer that assistance. You really want us to leave our home? It wasn't a question this time, but a statement tinged with resignation. Yes, that house represents years of imbalance, years of me accepting whatever scraps of attention and support were left after Nathan's needs were met. I need a clean break from that dynamic, and so do you and Mom. He studied me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not his compliant, accommodating daughter, but a young woman who had found her voice and her boundaries. I'll talk to your mother, he said finally. And Nathan, we'll figure something out. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding that the old patterns were broken beyond repair. As he rose to leave, he hesitated, then asked, Will you live there, in the house? No, I said with certainty. I have my own path now. The house is just a symbol, a means to an end. And what end is that? Balance, I replied. Justice. The chance to finish what I started without compromising who I am becoming. After he left, I remained at the table, watching darkness fall over the river. The confrontation had drained me, but beneath the exhaustion was a quiet strength, the knowledge that I had finally stood my ground, not with rage or vindictiveness, but with clarity and resolve. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more decisions. My parents might fight the eviction or try to manipulate me through guilt or Nathan's intervention. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt the weight of uncertainty lifting. My education was secure, my boundaries were established, and the pattern that had defined my family for so long was finally, irrevocably broken. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "How did it go with your dad?" I typed back. "It went. Not easy, but necessary. Tell you tomorrow." Walking to my car, I noticed the moon reflected in the river, full and bright, illuminating a path across the dark water. It reminded me of something my grandfather used to say. "Light always finds a way through, Jessie girl, even on the darkest night." He had been right about so many things. About education being the foundation of independence. About the importance of standing firm in your principles. About preparing for storms even when the sky seemed clear. And he'd been right about me. That beneath my quiet compliance was a core of steel that would eventually assert itself when pushed too far. The light had found its way through, revealing not just the path forward, but the strength I'd always had to walk it. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. I threw myself into preparations for the fall semester, meeting with academic advisors to confirm my schedule and finalizing details for my environmental policy internship. With the contingency fund released, my financial worries had evaporated, leaving me free to focus on my studies. But beneath the surface of this newfound security ran an undercurrent of tension about the Hawthorne house and my parents. They hadn't contacted me since my meeting with my father at the coffee shop. I knew from Nathan that they were looking at apartment listings, reluctantly accepting the reality of their situation. But there had been no direct communication. No acknowledgement of my terms. No indication of whether they planned to comply with the 60-day timeline I'd offered. "Maybe you should call them," Megan suggested one evening as we sat on our apartment balcony, sharing takeout Thai food and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Just to check in." I shook my head, pushing a piece of tofu around my plate. "They need to make the next move. I've been the one reaching out, accommodating, adjusting my entire life. It's their turn." "Fair enough," she conceded. "But what if they don't? What if they just stay in the house?" It was a question I'd been avoiding. The legal path forward was clear, formal eviction proceedings, but the emotional terrain was murkier. Could I actually go through with forcing my parents from their home of 25 years, the home where I'd grown up? Was I prepared for the potential fallout from extended family, from my parents' friends, from people who would hear only that I'd evicted my own parents without understanding the history behind that decision? "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it," I said, but uncertainty gnawed at me. 2 days later, as I was leaving campus after a meeting with my faculty advisor, my phone rang. My mother's name appeared on the screen, the first direct contact, since I'd visited the Hawthorne house and delivered my 30-day notice. I answered with cautious neutrality. "Hello?" "Jessica." Her voice sounded smaller somehow, less assured than I remembered. "I was wondering if you might have time to meet me for lunch tomorrow. Just the two of us." I hesitated, torn between wariness and a flicker of hope that she was ready to have the honest conversation we'd needed for so long. "What did you have in mind? That little cafe in Forest Park? The one with the garden seating we used to go to after Saturday hikes?" A pause. "They still have those lemon scones you like." The mention of our old weekend ritual, hikes through Forest Park followed by lunch at Three Pines Cafe, stirred memories I'd been trying to keep at a distance. There had been good times in our family, moments of connection and understanding, before the pattern of favoritism had calcified into something unmovable. Okay, I agreed. Noon? Noon is perfect. Thank you, Jessica. The formal politeness in her tone was new. A recognition, perhaps, that our relationship had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the daughter who would automatically accommodate her wishes, who could be counted on to smooth over awkward situations and accept whatever scraps of attention came my way. I was a woman who had set boundaries and expected them to be respected. The following day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect late summer days that make Portland gleam like a jewel set between river and mountains. I chose my outfit carefully, not the formal blazer and slacks I'd worn to the auction and subsequent confrontations, but not my usual casual campus wear either. A sundress in forest green, simple sandals, minimal jewelry, an ensemble that said, "I'm my own person," rather than "I'm your little girl" or "I'm your adversary. Three Pines Cafe hadn't changed in the years since our last visit. The same wrought iron tables dotted the garden patio, shaded by mature maple trees. The same chalkboard menu listed seasonal specials in colorful script. The same glass case displayed pastries that looked too perfect to eat. My mother was already seated at a corner table, a pot of tea and 2 cups arranged before her. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, her cheekbones more prominent, her wedding ring looking slightly loose on her finger. She stood when she saw me, an awkward half gesture, as if unsure whether to offer a hug or a handshake. We settled for a nod of greeting. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I took the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I thought maybe you were ready to have an honest conversation." She nodded, pouring tea into my cup with hands that trembled slightly. "I am. It's not easy for me. There are things I've never been good at facing directly. Your father says I live in a world of pleasant fictions." It was a surprisingly self-aware observation from my mother, who had spent most of my life smoothing over uncomfortable truths with cheerful deflection and strategic avoidance. The woman who had responded to my discovery of the empty college fund with talk of salmon fillets and dinner invitations. "I know about the house," she continued, setting down the teapot, "that you've given us 60 days instead of 30. Your father told me about your conversation, about your conditions. And we've found an apartment. It's small, just 2 bedrooms, but it's in a decent area near Washington Park. The lease starts next week." She twisted a paper napkin between her fingers. "We've started packing. It's strange, going through 25 years of accumulated life." I hadn't expected such swift compliance. "You're actually moving?" "We don't have much choice, do we?" A hint of bitterness colored her tone, but she visibly reined it in. "Sorry, that's not fair. We created this situation, not you." Our server arrived to take our order, the usual for both of us, it seemed, without needing to consult the menu. Some patterns ran too deep to easily discard. "Nathan came home last weekend," my mother said after the server departed. "He helped pack some of his old things, took what he wanted to keep. He's very upset with us." This surprised me. "With you? Not with me for buying the house?" "With all of us, I think. But especially with your father and me. He had no idea about the financial troubles, or that his Berkeley opportunity came at your expense. He feels complicit, I suppose. Used." I wasn't sure how to respond. Nathan's anger on my behalf was unexpected, a disruption of the dynamic where he accepted advantages without questioning their source or cost. "Your father told him everything," she continued. "About the failed Seattle investment, about the mortgages, about taking your college fund. He was brutally honest, probably for the first time in Nathan's life." "That was one of my conditions," I said, though I hadn't expected such immediate compliance. She nodded. "I know. It wasn't easy to watch to see Nathan's face as he understood what we'd done." But it was necessary, long overdue. Our food arrived. Cobb salad for her, veggie quiche for me, lemon scones to share. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the familiar flavors a counterpoint to the unfamiliar honesty between us. "I need to ask you something," I said finally, "and I need you to be completely truthful." She set down her fork, bracing herself. "All right. Why him? Why always him? Why was Nathan's education, his opportunities, his needs always prioritized? Over mine? Even when I worked harder, achieved more, asked for less?" It was the question that had haunted me for years, the core injury beneath all the specific instances of favoritism and neglect. My mother seemed to age before my eyes as she considered her answer, the carefully maintained facade crumbling to reveal the insecurities beneath. "The simplest answer is that he needed more. He struggled where you succeeded. He faltered where you flew." She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. "But that's not the whole truth, is it? The harder truth is that I saw myself in you. Your independence, your resilience, your ability to make your own way despite obstacles. And I saw your father in Nathan, charming but directionless, full of potential but needing constant guidance and support." She looked up, meeting my gaze directly. "I think, unconsciously, I was trying to correct the patterns of my own childhood through Nathan, to give him what I wished someone had given your father, enough structure and support to channel his talents productively. And because you seemed so capable, so self-sufficient, it was easy to justify directing our limited resources toward him." "That's not fair," I said, my voice tight. "Being competent shouldn't mean being overlooked. Being responsible shouldn't mean being taken for granted. No, it shouldn't." She reached across the table, hesitating just short of touching my hand. "You're right, Jessica. It wasn't fair. It wasn't conscious or malicious, but that doesn't make it any less harmful." The acknowledgement I demanded, delivered without excuses or deflection. It should have felt vindicating, but instead, a wave of grief washed over me. Grief for the years of seeking validation that never came, for the daughter who had learned to expect so little from those who should have given her everything. "I can't undo the past," my mother continued. "I can't go back and be the mother you deserved. But I can acknowledge the harm we caused. I can tell you that I see you now. Your strength, your integrity, your courage in standing up for yourself, even when it meant standing against us." Tears pricked behind my eyes, but I held them back. This moment was too important for the emotional release that might blur its clarity. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. "It matters." We finished our meal with lighter conversation, details about the apartment, plans for the moving process, an update on my fall schedule. As we waited for the check, my mother hesitated, then reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this," she said, placing it on the table between us. "It's a letter and, well, I'll let you read it yourself." I took the envelope, recognizing my father's distinctive handwriting on the front. "What is it?" "His version of acknowledgement, I suppose. He's not as good with spoken words as I am, but he wanted you to know." She trailed off. "Just read it when you're ready." Outside the cafe, we exchanged an awkward goodbye. Not quite a hug, more than a handshake. A brief contact that acknowledged both the distance between us and the tentative bridge we'd begun to build. "I am proud of you, Jessica," she said, as we parted. "Not despite all this, but because of it. It takes extraordinary courage to break patterns that have existed your entire life." I nodded, unable to voice the complex emotions her words evoked. "I'll be in touch about the move. Let me know if you need any help with arrangements." The letter from my father remained unopened in my bag as I drove back to my apartment. I wasn't ready yet to hear his perspective, to risk having this fragile sense of resolution disrupted by justifications or half-apologies. That evening, Nathan called. "Mom said you met for lunch. How did it go?" Better than expected, I said, curled on my sofa with a cup of tea. She actually acknowledged the favoritism. No excuses, no deflection. Wow. I don't think I've ever heard Mom admit being wrong about anything. He sounded genuinely impressed. Listen, Jess, I need to say something too. I'm sorry. I had no idea that my Berkeley tuition came from your fund. I would never have accepted it if I'd known. I know, Nathan. This isn't really about you. It's about the patterns our parents established, the way they've always operated. Still, I benefited from those patterns. I should have questioned things more, noticed how different our experiences were. He paused. I'm deferring enrollment at Berkeley, by the way. This caught me by surprise. What? Why? It doesn't feel right, starting there under these circumstances. And honestly, I'm not sure business school is what I really want. I think I just went along with it because Dad was so excited about the idea. It was the first time I could remember Nathan stepping back from the golden path always laid before him, questioning not just the means, but the destination itself. What will you do instead? I'm looking at AmeriCorps positions, actually. A year of service work to figure out what I actually care about, what I want to contribute, and I'm getting a job to start paying back what I owe you. Nathan, you don't have to— Yes, I do, he interrupted firmly. Maybe not legally, but morally. That was your money, designated for your education. I want to make it right. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, absorbing the seismic shifts in my family's dynamics, my mother's acknowledgement, Nathan's apology and change of direction, my father's letter, still unopened but representing some effort at communication. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was movement in a direction I hadn't dared hope for, toward honesty, toward accountability, toward the possibility of relationships built on mutual respect rather than entrenched patterns of inequity. The following weekend, I finally read my father's letter. Sitting on a bench in Peninsula Park, surrounded by late summer roses, I opened the envelope and unfolded 3 pages of his strong architectural handwriting. Jessica, I've started this letter a dozen times, struggling to find words that might bridge the gulf between us. Your mother has always been the communicator in our family. I've relied on her to smooth rough edges, to translate my thoughts into something more palatable. But she can't do that work for me now, nor should she. This is between you and me. First, I want to acknowledge that you were right. About everything. The pattern of favoritism toward Nathan, the unequal distribution of family resources and attention. The expectation that you would always accommodate, always understand, always make do with less than you deserved. It's a bitter thing to see yourself clearly for the first time and recognize that you've failed the person you were meant to protect. Doubly bitter to realize that this failure wasn't a momentary lapse, but a persistent pattern spanning years. I could offer explanations, that Nathan's struggles made him seem to need more support, that your competence made it easy to take you for granted, that financial pressures clouded my judgment. All of these contain elements of truth, but none. Excuse the fundamental inequity you experienced or the breach of trust when we emptied your college fund without warning or consultation. The hardest truth to face is how much I resented my own father's preference for you. William saw in you what I struggled to acknowledge, not just intelligence and determination, but wisdom and integrity beyond your years. He recognized your quiet strength while I was distracted by Nathan's louder needs. And rather than learning from my father's insight, I allowed that resentment to color my treatment of you. When you confronted us about the house, about the college fund, about the years of imbalance, my first response was anger. How dare you challenge the natural order of our family? How dare you refuse to play the role we'd assigned you? But beneath that anger was fear. Fear that you were right, that I had failed you in fundamental ways that might never be repaired. I don't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I do ask that you know this. I see you now. I see the extraordinary young woman you've become, not because of my parenting, but often in spite of it. I see your courage in standing up for yourself, in breaking patterns that have persisted for generations in our family. And I am prouder of you for that strength than I have words to express. We will honor your timeline for vacating the house. We will respect the boundaries you've established. And if someday you're open to rebuilding a relationship on new terms, terms of mutual respect and equality, I will consider myself fortunate beyond measure. Your father, Robert. I read the FI letter twice, then a third time, allowing the words to sink in. It wasn't perfect. There were still traces of the old dynamics in his phrasing, echoes of the hierarchical thinking that had shaped our family. But there was also genuine acknowledgement, a willingness to see his own failings without deflection or excuse. It was a beginning, not an ending. A foundation on which something new might eventually be built if I chose to participate in that construction. The 60-day timeline passed more quickly than anticipated. Between my preparations for the fall semester, the release of the contingency fund, and meetings with Mr. Donovan about the long-term management of the Hawthorne property, I had little time to dwell on the approaching move-out date. My parents had been unexpectedly efficient. Through Nathan, I learned they'd sold or donated much of their furniture, had begun painting and cleaning the apartment, had even purchased a few new items scaled to their reduced living space. The actual move was scheduled for the coming weekend, with a small rental truck and help from my father's brother. On the appointed day, I drove to the Hawthorne house, uncertain of what role, if any, I should play in this transition. Would my presence be helpful, or would it just add tension to an already difficult situation? Should I maintain professional distance as the property owner, or acknowledge the complex personal relationships involved? I parked down the street, observing from a distance. The moving truck was already half filled, with my uncle and father carrying boxes while my mother directed operations from the porch. They had made significant progress without me, another sign of the shifting dynamics in our family. As I watched, Nathan's car pulled up. He emerged carrying coffee trays and a bag that probably contained breakfast. Always the golden child. Arriving with refreshments while the actual work was well underway. Some patterns were deeply ingrained. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing inside with the provisions, Nathan set them on the porch table and immediately began helping with the heavier items, directing my father to take a break. He worked steadily, efficiently, without the dramatic sighs or complaints that had characterized his contributions to family projects in the past. After about 15 minutes of observation, I made my decision. I walked toward the house, not rushing but not hesitating either. My mother spotted me first, her hand rising in a half wave before uncertainty clouded her expression. "Jessica," she said as I approached the porch. "We didn't expect you today." "I thought I might help," I replied simply, "if that's okay." Nathan emerged from the house carrying a box labeled Kitchen Fragile. He paused when he saw me, then nodded in greeting. "Hey, Jess. Good timing. Dad's back is acting up, and Uncle Steve is about to leave for his grandson's soccer game." Just like that, I was incorporated into the moving process, assigned to help my mother with the remaining kitchen items while Nathan and my uncle handled furniture. My father, looking older than I remembered, sat on the porch with an ice pack, occasionally calling out suggestions that everyone politely acknowledged and mostly ignored. We worked in a strange harmony, the four of us plus my uncle, moving between rooms with minimal conversation but effective coordination. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but neither was it hostile. It was transitional. A family in flux, navigating unfamiliar terrain without a map, but with a shared destination. By mid-afternoon, the truck was fully loaded. My mother made a final walkthrough of the empty house, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors now bare of rugs and furniture. My father stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane I hadn't seen before. his expression unreadable as he surveyed the space that had been the center of our family life for 25 years. "Do you want a few minutes alone?" I asked him, surprising myself with the offer. He shook his head. "No, it's time to move forward, not look back." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a set of keys, holding them out to me. "These are yours now. All of them. House, garage, storage shed, mailbox." I took the keys, their weight in my palm, both literal and symbolic. "Thank you." "We've left it clean," my mother said, joining us in the doorway. "And the roof was replaced just last year, so that shouldn't be an issue for a while." "I appreciate that," I said, recognizing the practical information as her way of maintaining some dignity in the transition. Not just evicted tenants, but responsible homeowners transferring property. Nathan appeared behind them, car keys in hand. "Mom, Dad, I'll follow you to the apartment. Jess, are you coming too?" It was a question loaded with implications. Was I just the enforcer of eviction, or was I still family, still connected to their lives beyond this property transaction? "Yes," I decided. "I'd like to see the new place, if that's okay." My mother's relief was visible. "Of course it's okay. We've been wanting to show you. It's small, but the light is lovely in the afternoon, and there's a park just across the street." We locked the Hawthorne house, my house now, and separated to our respective vehicles. As I followed the moving truck and Nathan's car through familiar streets toward a neighborhood I knew less well, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. 3 months ago, I had been a struggling student facing the collapse of my educational plans, betrayed by the people who should have protected me, uncertain of my future and my worth in my own family. Now I was a property owner with secure educational funding, acknowledged and apologized to by those same people, standing firmly in my power and my principles. The pain wasn't gone. The years of inequity couldn't be erased by a single conversation or letter. But something had shifted, not just in my circumstances, but in the fundamental dynamics of our family. For the first time, I wasn't adjusting to accommodate everyone else's needs and preferences. For the first time, the consequences of choices were falling on those who had made them, rather than being deflected onto me. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice exactly. It was simply balance, the natural realignment that occurs when someone who has always carried too much finally sets down their burden and says, "No more." As I parked behind the moving truck at a modest apartment complex near Washington Park, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness precisely, but something adjacent to it. The relief of authenticity, of seeing clearly and being seen in return. The future remained uncertain, the relationships fragile and in transition. But for now, for this moment, it was enough to know that I had stood my ground, broken the pattern, and created space for something new to grow from the ruins of what had been. 5 years passed like leaves turning in the wind. I completed my environmental science degree with honors and went on to earn my master's in urban sustainability. The internship that had once seemed threatened blossomed into a full-time position with the city planning department, where I now led green infrastructure initiatives across Portland. The Hawthorne house never became my home. After my parents moved out, I renovated it, removing the heavy curtains my mother had favored, updating the kitchen my father had always promised to modernize but never did, painting walls in colors that reflected light rather than absorbing it. When the work was complete, I listed it as a rental property, using the income to supplement my savings and build toward my future. My relationship with my parents evolved slowly, cautiously, like a plant regrowing after harsh pruning. The first year was the hardest. Stilted holiday gatherings, careful conversations that avoided certain topics, the awkward dance of people who share history but are uncertain of their present connection. Nathan surprised everyone by thriving in his AmeriCorps position, working with at-risk youth in East Portland. The experience transformed him, replacing his entitled outlook with genuine empathy and purpose. He eventually enrolled at Portland State instead of Berkeley, studying social work rather than business, and maintained his promise to repay my college fund through monthly contributions. My father found work as a consultant for small businesses, a position with less prestige than his former role, but more stability. My mother taught piano lessons and volunteered at a community garden. Their lives were simpler now, scaled to their actual resources rather than the illusion of affluence they'd maintained for so long. On a crisp autumn day, 5 years to the week since the foreclosure auction, I received a call from Mr. Donovan, my grandfather's attorney. "I'm retiring," he explained, "and organizing my files. I found something I think you should have. Documents. Related to your grandfather's estate that went beyond the contingency fund you accessed." That afternoon, I sat in his office one final time, surrounded by half-packed boxes and empty shelves. He handed me a thick folder tied with string. "William left instructions that this be given to you on your 30th birthday," he said. "But under the circumstances, I think he'd want you to have it now." Inside was a detailed account of my grandfather's business dealings, his philosophy on wealth and responsibility, and, most surprisingly, a trust fund I hadn't known existed, one that would mature when I turned 30 in just 6 months. "He believed in you," Mr. Donovan said simply. "He saw something in you that he wanted to nurture and protect." That evening, sitting on my apartment balcony overlooking the Willamette River, I called my parents. "I'd like to come for dinner this weekend," I said when my mother answered. "There's something I want to discuss with you both." 3 days later, I sat at their modest dining table, a far cry from the grand mahogany piece that had dominated our family meals in the Hawthorne house. My father, gray now at the temples, served a simple pasta dish while my mother poured water into mismatched glasses. "I received some news," I began after we'd eaten. "Grandpa Will established another trust that will mature when I turn 30. My father's expression tightened slightly, the old resentment of his father's financial decisions briefly visible before he controlled it. "That's wonderful, Jessica. He always believed in planning ahead." "I've been thinking about what to do with it," I continued, "and I've made a decision I wanted to share with you." I explained my plan, using part of the trust to establish a scholarship fund for environmental science students from disadvantaged backgrounds, investing another portion in a sustainable housing development for low-income families, and setting aside the remainder for eventual retirement and security. "That's very much like you," my mother said warmly. "Always thinking of how to make systems work better for everyone. There's one more thing." I took a deep breath. "I'm selling the Hawthorne house, and I'd like to offer you the first opportunity to buy it back at the same price I paid at the foreclosure auction, adjusted only for the improvements I've made." Silence fell across the table. My father set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "Why would you do that?" "Because it was your home for 25 years. Because despite everything, there were good memories there, traditions worth preserving. And because I've realized that true justice isn't about holding on to leverage, but about creating opportunities for healing and growth." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Jessica, we couldn't possibly afford—" "You could with a fair mortgage based on the reduced price," I said. "I've spoken with a bank. With your improved credit and steady income, you'd qualify. The monthly payments would actually be less than your current rent." My father studied me with new eyes. "This isn't obligation or guilt speaking?" "No," I said firmly. "This is choice. My choice." The house was never about punishment or revenge. It was about establishing boundaries and consequences. Those boundaries are now clear. Those consequences have been lived. We're different people than we were 5 years ago. They didn't answer immediately, taking time to consider rather than rushing toward an easy solution, itself a sign of how much had changed. Eventually, my father nodded slowly. "We'll think about it," he said. "Really think about it, not just react. And whatever we decide, Jessica, Thank you for offering us this choice. Walking back to my car later that evening, I paused to look up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. My grandfather had taught me their names during summer nights, on the hawthorn porch, pointing out constellations with the same patience he'd shown in explaining compound interest and educational investments. We're all just temporary caretakers, he'd told me once, of property, of knowledge, of relationships. The question is whether we leave them better than we found them. Standing under that vast sky, keys in hand and future open before me, I finally understood what he meant. Some inheritances can't be measured in dollars or deeds. The most valuable legacy is the courage to break harmful patterns, the wisdom to use power with compassion, and the strength to create new beginnings from painful endings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.